I never imagined a family dinner could end with me being thrown out onto the street like a piece of trash. I was there, at one of the fanciest restaurants in Columbus, simply trying to be a good mother and grandmother. But then my daughter-in-law, Jessica, in a sudden venomous fit of rage, called me a beggar in front of my son, my grandchildren, and a room full of strangers. As if the word itself wasn't sharp enough to cut me open, she flagged down a security guard and had me escorted out. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush of shame that prickled my skin and blurred my vision with tears I refused to let fall. I stood on that cold pavement, the restaurant's warm, golden light spilling out behind me, feeling utterly alone and profoundly hurt. But in that moment of absolute degradation, something inside me ignited. A tiny, defiant spark in the darkness. This wasn't just about my wounded pride, it was about my dignity, my place in my own family. I decided right then and there that I would not let this single cruel act define me or sever the bonds with my son Mark and my grandchildren, Leo and Mia. My journey from that curb was the beginning of a quiet battle to reclaim my self-respect and my family. It was a path paved with difficult confrontations, painful truths, and the crushing weight of their silence. But through it, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. This is my story of overcoming, of demanding respect, and of the unwavering power of a mother's love, which I learned is worth any fight. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. It all started with an invitation that felt more like a summons. Mark had called, his voice strained and unnaturally cheerful. "Mom, Jessica wants to celebrate my promotion. We've booked a table at the Onyx Room for Friday night. You have to be there." The Onyx Room, the name alone sounded expensive. It was the kind of place where the waiters didn't just take your order, they judged your shoes. I'm a retired teacher. My life is comfortable, but it's simple. My joys are my garden, my books, and the crayon drawings from my grandkids that decorate my fridge. A place like the Onyx Room was Jessica's world, not mine. "Oh, Mark, that's wonderful news about the promotion, but that place sounds a bit too fancy for me," I said, trying to gently decline. "Please, Mom," he'd insisted. "It means a lot to Jessica, and the kids are so excited to see you." That was the line that always got me. Leo, at 10, was my little man of science, and Mia, at 7, was a whirlwind of glitter and imagination. The thought of their excited faces was enough to make me agree to almost anything. So I pushed aside my discomfort and promised to be there. Friday arrived with a nervous flutter in my stomach. I spent an hour deciding what to wear, finally settling on a simple but elegant navy blue dress, one of the few expensive items I owned, a gift from my late husband, David. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who looked neat and respectable, but I felt like a fraud, like I was playing dress-up for a life that wasn't mine. When I arrived at the restaurant, the hostess led me to a large circular booth where the family was already seated. The air was thick with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of heavy silverware. Mark stood up to give me a quick, almost furtive hug. Leo and Mia yelled "Grandma" in unison and dove in for a real hug, their small arms a warm comfort around my waist. It was the only genuine moment of the evening. Jessica didn't stand. She offered a tight, painted-on smile from across the table, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of my outfit. "Carol," she said, her voice as crisp as a new dollar bill. "Glad you could make it." Jessica was beautiful, in the way a marble statue is beautiful, flawless, cold and hard. She was a successful real estate agent, and she never let anyone forget it. Her life was a carefully curated collection of expensive things, the designer handbag on the seat beside her, the diamond earrings that glittered under the dim lighting, the perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her wine glass. The dinner conversation was a monologue delivered by Jessica. She talked about the closing of a multi-million-dollar house, the plans for a lavish vacation to Turks and Caicos, and the new German SUV she was planning to buy. Mark just nodded along, a placid smile on his face, occasionally glancing at me as if to check if I was sufficiently impressed. I tried to engage with the kids, asking Leo about his science fair project and Mia about her dance recital, but Jessica would always steer the conversation back to herself. The tension came to a head when the waiter brought the check. Mark reached for it, but Jessica swatted his hand away playfully. "I've got this, honey." A little celebration for my successful husband, she made a grand show of pulling a platinum credit card from her wallet. Trying to be gracious, I opened my purse. "Please, Jessica, let me at least leave the tip. It's the least I can do to celebrate Mark's success." Jessica's eyes narrowed. She let out a short, sharp laugh that wasn't humorous at all. It was a sound of pure contempt. "The tip, Carol, the tip here is probably more than your weekly grocery budget. Don't worry about it." The comment hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Jess, come on," he started, but his voice was weak. I felt my face flush with heat. "That was uncalled for, Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I was just trying to contribute." And that's when she snapped. The mask of polite society fell away, revealing something ugly and cruel beneath. "Contribute?" She sneered, her voice rising, drawing the attention of the tables around us. "What could you possibly contribute? Everything you have is because of us. The little allowance Mark gives you so you can play in your garden. We pay for you, Carol. You live off our generosity." She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You come here to my celebration, in your little hand-me-down dress, and you pretend you're part of this. You're not. You're a charity case." A beggar. The word beggar struck me like a physical blow. It echoed in the sudden silence of the restaurant. My son just sat there, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from his furious wife to his humiliated mother, and did nothing. He said nothing. My heart shattered. It wasn't just Jessica's cruelty, it was Mark's silence. That was the deeper wound. With tears welling in my eyes, I gathered my purse, my hands shaking. "I think I should go," I whispered. "Good idea," Jessica spat. She turned and motioned to a large man in a suit standing by the entrance. "Security, could you please escort this woman out? She's disturbing our dinner." The security guard, a burly man with a weary expression, walked over to our table. He looked at Jessica, then at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Before I could answer, Jessica said, "Yes, she needs to leave, now." He looked at Mark, who simply stared down at his plate, a portrait of spineless inaction. The guard sighed, and gently touched my arm. "Ma'am, please, let's not make a scene." The touch was gentle, but it felt like a brand. I was being removed, discarded. I looked at my son one last time, my eyes pleading with him to say something, to do something, to be the man I raised him to be. He wouldn't meet my gaze. As the guard led me away, past the staring faces of strangers, the last thing I heard was Mia's small, confused voice. "Why is Grandma leaving?" I didn't hear the answer. The heavy wooden door of the onyx room closed behind me, shutting me out in the cold night air. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and tears. I don't remember the route I took, but somehow my car found its way back to the familiar, quiet street of my small suburban house. Each red light, each stop sign, felt like a pause for another wave of pain to wash over me. The word was on a loop in my head, spoken in Jessica's sharp, cutting tone. It wasn't just an insult. It was an indictment of my entire life, my choices, my worth. My late husband David and I had worked hard. We hadn't been rich, but we had been proud. We built a life on love, respect, and principles. Where had I gone so wrong that my own son would sit silently while his wife tore all of that down? I parked in my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, the silence of the garage amplifying the roaring in my ears. The house I'd returned to, the house David and I had bought 40 years ago, had never felt so empty. It was filled with ghosts of a happier time, the echo of Mark's teenage laughter in the hallway, the memory of David grilling burgers in the backyard, the faint scent of Mia's bubblegum perfume from her last visit. Now it just felt like a monument to a life and a family that no longer existed. Finally forcing myself out of the car, I walked into the house and straight to the kitchen. My reflection in the dark window was a stranger, a woman with mascara smudged under her eyes and a look of hollow shock. I saw the framed photos on the counter, one of Mark at his college graduation, beaming with pride, another of my wedding day with David, and the most recent one of Leo and Mia, smiling gap-toothed at the camera during our last trip to the zoo. My family, or what I thought was my family. I couldn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene at the restaurant over and over. Every detail was seared into my memory, the condescending smirk on Jessica's face, the averted eyes of the other diners, the heavy hand of the security guard on my arm, and worst of all, Mark's deafening silence. His betrayal hurt more than Jessica's malice. She was practically a stranger to my heart, but Mark was a part of it. He was my son. The next morning, the anger started to seep in, pushing past the hurt. It was a slow-burning fire in my chest. How dare she? How dare he let her? The small monthly transfer Mark sent me wasn't an allowance. After David passed, his pension was small, and I had used most of our savings to help Mark and Jessica with a down payment on their first house, a fact Jessica conveniently forgot. The money Mark sent was his own idea, a way of paying back a small portion of that loan, something we'd agreed on together. For her to twist that into me being a beggar was a level of cruelty I couldn't comprehend. My first instinct was to call Mark and scream at him, to demand an explanation, to ask him how he could sit there and let that happen. I picked up my phone a dozen times, my thumb hovering over his name. But what would it accomplish? He had already shown me who he was in that moment of crisis. He had chosen his wife's side. Yelling would only make me look hysterical, further proving Jessica's narrative that I was a disturbing presence. No, I needed a different approach. This couldn't be a war of words. It had to be a campaign of dignity. I wouldn't stoop to their level. I would rise above it. My fight wouldn't be for their approval, but for my own self-respect. I had to show them, and more importantly, myself, that I was not a beggar. I was a woman of substance, a woman who had built a life and raised a son, a woman who deserved respect, not pity. My resolve hardened. My first step was to reclaim my financial independence, no matter how small. I went to my computer and cancelled the automatic deposit from Mark's account. It was only a few $100s a month, but it was a symbol. Accepting it now felt like accepting Jessica's label. I would have to be more careful with my budget, but the feeling of taking back control was worth more than the money. It was my first act of defiance. Next, I turned to my garden. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I felt capable and in control. As I plunged my hands into the cool earth, pulling weeds and tending to my tomato plants, I felt a sense of clarity. Jessica saw my simple life as a sign of failure. She couldn't understand that wealth isn't always measured in dollars. My wealth was in the vibrant blooms of my roses, in the satisfaction of a home-cooked meal made with vegetables I grew myself, in the peace and quiet of my own home. I decided right then that I would expand my little hobby. I had always made jams and preserves for friends and neighbors. They always told me I should sell them. Maybe it was time I listened. It wouldn't make me rich, but it would be mine. My own work, my own money, my own pride. It was a small step, but it was a start. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to build something new from the ashes of that humiliating night. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. The days that followed were defined by a profound and painful silence. My phone, which usually chirped with texts from Mark or pictures of the kids, stayed dark. I didn't reach out, and neither did he. It was a silent standoff, and with each passing day, the chasm between us grew wider. A part of me, the mother in me, was screaming to just call him, to forgive him, to do whatever it took to hear my grandchildren's voices again. But the other part, the newly awakened woman who had been called a beggar, knew that caving in would mean sacrificing the last shred of my dignity. So, I channeled all that hurt and anger into action. My plan to sell jams and preserves became my singular focus. I turned my kitchen into a mini factory. I researched local farmers' markets, cottage food laws, and label designs. I spent hours sterilizing jars, simmering berries and peaches on the stove, the sweet, bubbling aroma filling my quiet house with a sense of purpose. I created a simple label, Carol's Garden, made with love in Columbus. It was humble, but it was honest. It was me. My first Saturday at the North Market was terrifying. I set up my little folding table, my colorful jars of strawberry rhubarb jam, spicy peach chutney, and classic dill pickles lined up in neat rows. I felt exposed, vulnerable, my small enterprise on display for everyone to judge. The other vendors were seasoned pros with slick banners and credit card readers. I had a cash box and a hand-painted sign. For the first hour, people just walked past. My heart sank with each person who glanced over and kept walking. Was Jessica right? Was I just a pathetic old woman playing make-believe? But then a young woman stopped. She picked up a jar of my spicy peach chutney. "This looks amazing," she said, smiling. "My mum used to make chutney like this. It's an old family recipe," I replied, my voice shaky. She bought 2 jars. And just like that, the spell was broken. A few more people stopped, drawn in by the first customer. They asked questions, they sampled the jam, and they bought my products. By the end of the day, I had sold nearly half my stock and made over $200. It wasn't a fortune, but as I packed up my table, the crisp bills in my cash box felt like $1,000,000. It was money I had earned entirely on my own. It was proof that I could contribute, that I had value. This became my new routine. Weekdays were for gardening, cooking, and bottling. Saturdays were for the market. I started to build a small following of regular customers. They knew me as the jam lady. They'd tell me about how they used my chutney on pork chops, or how their kids loved my strawberry jam on their morning toast. These small interactions were a balm to my wounded soul. I was connecting with people again, not as Mark's mother or Jessica's mother-in-law, but simply as Carol. But my family was never far from my mind. The ache for my grandchildren was a constant dull pain. I knew I couldn't see them at their house, but I found other ways. I knew Leo had soccer practice every Tuesday at a public park. One Tuesday, I gathered my courage and went. I didn't approach them. I just sat on a bench on the far side of the field, wearing a hat and sunglasses, just so I could watch him play. I saw him score a goal, and my heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost brought me to tears. Another time, I saw on a community Facebook page that Mia's elementary school was having an art walk. I went walking through the crowded hallways filled with proud parents and colorful chaotic art. And there it was, a bright, glittery painting of a garden. In the bottom corner, in a child's careful script, it said, "My Grandma's Garden by Mia." My breath hitched. She remembered, despite whatever poison Jessica was pouring in her ears, she still remembered our time together, our special place. I stood in front of that painting for a long time, a silent anonymous observer, my heart a painful mix of joy and sorrow. The inevitable confrontation with Mark happened about 2 months after the incident. He called me on a weekday afternoon. His voice was tense. "Mom, we need to talk." "I'm listening, Mark," I said, my voice even. "Jessica is she's upset. Her friend saw you at Leo's soccer practice. She thinks you're stalking the kids." The accusation was so absurd, it was almost laughable. Stalking, Mark? I was sitting on a public bench watching my grandson play soccer. Is that a crime now? You know what I mean, Mum. It makes things difficult. You're putting me in a tough position. A tough position. My calm finally broke. The hurt and anger of the past 2 months came bubbling to the surface. Let me tell you about a tough position, Mark. It's sitting at a table while your wife calls your mother a beggar and then does nothing. It's being thrown out of a restaurant like a criminal while your son stares at his plate. It's not hearing from your family for 2 months. That, Mark, is a tough position. Me watching my grandson from a distance because I'm too afraid to get any closer. That's just heartbreaking. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. What do you want from me, Mum? I want my son back, I said, the words raw with emotion. I want the man I raised to stand up for what's right. I don't want your money. I never did, I just want respect, and I want to be a grandmother to my grandchildren. That's all I've ever wanted. I told him about the market, about my little business. I didn't say it to brag, but to show him I wasn't the helpless woman his wife had painted me as. I'm building a life for myself, Mark. On my own terms. The door is always open to you and the kids, but it has to be a door you walk through with respect. I will not be treated like that ever again. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't the tired sigh I heard. I'll talk to Jessica, he mumbled, a phrase I'd heard countless times before. It was his version of a retreat. We ended the call, and I felt drained but also strangely empowered. I had finally said what needed to be said. I had drawn my line in the sand. Now it was up to him to decide which side he wanted to be on. Life settled into a new kind of normal. My jam business was thriving in its own small way. I had a new circle of market friends, a sense of purpose, and a burgeoning self-confidence I hadn't felt in years. I continued my discreet visits to the kids' events, a silent guardian angel watching from afar. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer consumed me. I was proving to myself that I could be happy on my own. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, a 10-year-old boy and a school project. Leo's class was assigned a project on family heritage. Each student had to interview an older relative to create a family tree and a story about their family's history. According to the email from his teacher, which was sent to all parents and guardians on file, a list I was thankfully still on, it was a major grade. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Grandma? The small voice on the other end made my heart stop. Leo? Honey, is that you? Yeah, he said. His voice hushed, as if he were hiding. Mom doesn't know I'm calling. I'm using my friend's phone. I need to ask you some questions for a school project. Tears welled in my eyes. Of course, sweetheart. Ask me anything. For the next hour, I told him stories he had never heard. I told him about his great-grandparents, who had immigrated to America with nothing but hope. I told him about his grandpa David, how he was a decorated veteran and a man who could fix anything. I told him about how I had helped his dad and mom buy their first house, the very house he was living in. I spoke about our family not in terms of money or success, but in terms of love, sacrifice, and resilience. So, Grandpa David was a hero? Leo asked, his voice full of awe. He was a hero to me, I said softly. And you gave Mom and Dad the money for our house. I helped them, yes. That's what family does for each other. There was a pause, then he said something that explained everything. Mom said we don't talk to you anymore because you were trying to steal our money. The air left my lungs. It was a lie so monstrous, so completely backward, that I felt dizzy. Jessica hadn't just insulted me, she had maliciously poisoned my own grandchildren against me. Oh, Leo, I said, my voice thick with emotion, that is the furthest thing from the truth. Loving you and Mia is the only thing I've ever wanted. It has never ever been about money. We talked a little longer before he had to go. After I hung up, I sat in my armchair, feeling a mix of rage and vindication. The truth was finally starting to seep through the cracks. What I didn't know was that Mark was in the next room when Leo was doing his research. He had overheard his son asking him later that evening, Dad, why did Mom say Grandma is a beggar who wants our money? She's the one who gave you money for our house. And Grandpa David was a war hero. Faced with his son's innocent, direct question, Mark had no defense. The carefully constructed wall he had built around himself, the one that allowed him to ignore the truth, finally crumbled. He confronted Jessica that night. I wasn't there, but I can only imagine the scene. For the first time, he didn't back down. He didn't mumble an apology and retreat. He pushed back, armed with the truth from his own son and the words from our last phone call. The next day, Mark showed up at my front door, alone. He looked tired, older than his years, but there was a clarity in his eyes I hadn't seen since before he married Jessica. He didn't say much at first. He just handed me a large, colorful poster board. It was Leo's family tree project. In the center was a picture of me and David on our wedding day. Branching off from it were photos of him, of Leo, and of Mia. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "The foundation of our family." "He got an A," Mark said, his voice cracking. He stood up in front of the class and talked about his grandpa, the war hero, and his grandma, who makes the best jam in Ohio, and helped us buy our house. I looked at him, and all the anger I had held onto for months simply melted away, replaced by the overwhelming love for my son, this broken man standing on my doorstep. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he wept, finally breaking down. "I've been a coward. I let her disrespect you, and I did nothing. I was so caught up in the life she wanted, the money, the status. I lost sight of what was actually important. I am so sorry." I pulled him into a hug, and he sobbed into my shoulder like he did when he was a little boy who had scraped his knee. We stood there in my doorway for a long time, mother and son, finally finding our way back to each other. Things aren't perfect. Jessica and I will likely never have a warm relationship. She offered a stiff, formal apology through Mark, which I accepted for the sake of peace. She doesn't come to my house, and I don't go to hers. But Mark brings the kids to see me every single weekend. We work in the garden, we bake, and I tell them stories about their grandfather. We've rebuilt our bond, this time on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. Mark is learning to be a stronger man, and I have learned that my worth isn't defined by anyone else's opinion. I still sell my jams at the market. It's my little corner of the world, a symbol of my independence. Sometimes Mark and the kids will come and help me, Leo making a mess with the cash box, and Mia charming every customer into a free sample. And in those moments, surrounded by the fruits of my own labor and the pure, unconditional love of my family, I know I'm the richest woman in the world. I'm no beggar, I am a survivor, I am a grandmother, and I am proud. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.